Well, welcome back. We've been spending some time getting to know ourselves a little better, getting to know how the universe works a little better, getting to know that every one of us is a co-creator. It's a co-creative powerhouse in this universe. And we're creating a life, and that life is created out of design or out of default. We're learning to be more aware, more focused, more intentional, and also to access the creative powers that are in us, to harness those towards something that we desire that's good for ourselves, for others, and for our world. Now, one of the things that we're focusing on at this point of time is learning how to really hear from our intuition, our voice of higher guidance, answers that are specifically required to help us to take the next steps that are ours to take in the fulfillment of our vision. We're learning how to distinguish that voice of truth from all the other cacophony of lesser voices of history, of ego, of messages from the media and other people's circumstances. But we're learning also that we can hear a higher guidance through many, many means and avenues and channels. And that next step of this is learning how to create for yourself, a support structure that really helps you navigate the gap between where you've been and where you want to go. In the 30s, Napoleon Hill was commissioned by Andrew Carnegie to study successful people. And one of the things that he discovered was that successful people have a practice of creating something. He would then come to call a mastermind group, a group of whose focus and intention is for helping each other to be at a higher mind, in a higher mind, that is, and call it the land of the solution, the mind that has all the answers. And that we find it is much more facilitative if we will work together, if two or more we gather together in this intention of accessing answers, support. This is created among us, among a third mind. And in that mind, the Edison called the solution mind. So you too can have access to this. This is how we're going to find it. So first of all, you make an intention that you're going to get this kind of support that you want, at least one mastermind partner in your group or your team. One, or my term is a partner in believing. So you remember the story with Jack Boland, and he asked Mary, "Can you believe?" And she responded, "I don't think so." And then next he said, "Then believe in my belief, just as Mary did for me and what I'm doing for you." So when I was going through all of the tragedy with the rape, and then God's eyes were already married, and then onto my second husband immediately after, and being in a spiritual pilgrimage with Mary, as I shared with you in the beginning of the series, Mary asked me, "Can you believe?" And I was scared, just like I'm sure you're scared. And I said, "No, I believe more in the pain that I felt at the time." And she looked at me and she said, "Well, could you believe this?" And in that moment, I realized she could believe bigger than I could believe. And I trusted that and I leaned into that. Now we're going to be given a process here. This is tried and it's true. It's demonstrated on thousands of people all over the world have made use of this practice that's available to every single one of us. And it's called developing partners in believing. So Wayne Dyer shared about a time he was flying from Fort Lauderdale, I think it was, to Chicago to speak, and the whole plane was full. They took off and they were gone. And it was not far from Fort Lauderdale, and they started having some engine trouble. So they had to turn back around to go back to Fort Lauderdale and land. Now 300 people are getting off the plane and all still wanting to go to Chicago. But by the time he gets to the front of the counter, the agent's saying to him, "Well, there are no more flights to Chicago today." And Wayne said, "Well, can you check Miami, please?" And he said, "Nowhere. I already checked 300 passengers. We've had to reassign, and there's no more flights to Chicago today." Well, he said, "I'm supposed to speak there tonight. I've got 5,000 people at an event, and I'm supposed to be there." And the guy says, "Well, I'm sorry, sir. There's nothing I can do. I mean, we're sorry. We apologize for the engine trouble, but we're not going to be able to get you to Chicago today." And he looked at him and he said, "Is there someone else I can talk to who doesn't believe it's impossible?" And he said, "Excuse me?" And Wayne said, "Well, all I'm asking is there someone else behind that counter that I can speak with who doesn't believe that it's impossible?" So he kind of huffed at him and he walked away, and another person came up and he said, I'm asking one thing. I'm asking that you believe first that it's possible that I get to Chicago today. I have a group of that I'm speaking to tonight with 5,000 people in attendance, and I just want you to believe that it's possible that I could get to Chicago tonight. And the attendant said, well, as far as I know, everything's booked. And he said, but I'll look. And he started looking, and Wayne was just, as he was telling the story, he said within a few minutes, within 3 minutes, this gentleman had an idea, had landed in the agent's mind about a completely different routing through St. Louis. That was a complete innovative route. And there were several stops along the way, but Wayne Dyer landed in Chicago in time for his speaking engagement that night. Now, he could have easily been turned away, but he said he really learned something in that moment, which was to get someone else to agree with you that it's not impossible. Now, let's think about how it could happen, instead of just thinking, what's the problem? What's in the way? Because those kind of thoughts, what's the problem? What's in the way, will stop us. If we don't learn to think beyond the problem, the challenges for most of us we get so convinced by the challenges and by the conditions that it's difficult for us alone to think beyond those conditions so we create a partner in believing, or many partners in believing. So there was a woman that I knew named Anita. Now, Anita was a mom who had very little education, and she just barely finished high school. And the man she fell in love with and married had left. She had 2 little kids, and he never paid child support. She was left alone. She didn't have much education, and she didn't have much training. So she worked in a fast food restaurant in the mornings and in the afternoons, and in the evening she would take in alterations. Between those 2 jobs, she was able to support herself and her 2 kids. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with her 5-year-old son and her 7-year-old daughter. She and her daughter shared the bed, and the son slept on a pull-out couch. This was Anita's life. I mean, she worked very, very hard to take care of her kids, but she had visions herself. She really wanted those visions to come true, but she found herself thinking over and over again, there's no way I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to be stuck in this forever. I don't have an education. I have to put so many hours into supporting us, just to support us. And the apartment was $500 a month. And she was working for minimum wage. So it took everything she had to just make ends meet. And that was a struggle. So she decided to give herself a shot at doing some vision creating. She had enough belief in me that maybe she could try on these processes. And I just kept encouraging her to try it out, to just try it on. So if you looked at her conditions at the conditions of Anita's life, you too maybe would agree this is a tough thing. I mean, no education, working at a fast food restaurant, taking in alterations at night, 2 kids, no spouse or former spouse with the help of the money, the economics coming in. But Anita made a decision. She was going to try this on. She was going to give it a chance. She was going to experiment with it. She didn't just do the longing. She didn't just test the vision. She didn't just do the step 3, which of course was start to build the bigger deserving. But to build the vision and then test the vision. Yes, it's a good vision. It's not just for me. It's something that will benefit others. I'm a daughter of the universe. I deserve this. And her vision was to create a home for her family. She didn't just want a 1-bedroom apartment, not based on what she thought she could do, but what she really wanted to do was have like a little 3-bedroom place where she could live with her kids, and they could each have their own bedroom, and maybe there'd be a little fenced in yard where they could have a dog. She just felt like her son needed a dog, and the kids would love that. So she was willing to take on a challenge, but she had no idea how to do it. So she also took the steps that we're talking about now, and she took the process of forgiving, which is an important aspect of vision creating. So you clear the field. There's not, you've got to get that toxicity out of the very life of your vision. So she wanted to forgive her children's father. He had divorced her, skipped town, never paying a penny in child support. So, it didn't mean that she had to like the fact that his negligence meant that her kids had to do without. But she decided that her resentment was not going to help her kids. And it certainly was not helping her. So she decided to let the resentment go. to leave that behind. And she began to feel sad for him. And she realized that he's the one who's going to miss out on the relationship with these incredible kids. And she felt sad for him, that whatever it was, it would cause him to take those actions that were in him. And she decided to give thanks for the fact that she had these two wonderful kids and turned her attention towards that. So while she had disappointment about what happened, there was no more rage, there was no more resentment. Anita didn't just do the step of listening to the voice that inspired insight, because she felt like she had followed every piece of guidance she'd been given. She was willing to do the next step, which was what we're talking about now. And that's to build a bigger believing. This is where we realize the power of the mastermind. We realize that if you look into Jesus and the life of Jesus, the first thing that he did was gather a mastermind, a group of partners in believing. And then he would say later, as one of the great mastermind, or as one of the great metaphysicians, someone who without the intellectual understanding of quantum physics, he clearly understood how how it works in the universe when he said, whenever two or more are gathered in my name, I am in your midst. Whenever two or more are gathered, he said, in my name. And his name actually meant, through the Greek, means nature. So we're in this mind of Christ, the believing mind, the mind of all opportunity. So when you and I are in that mind of all opportunity, when we are focused there, when we are intentionally moving into that mind, okay, so we may not know how, but there's got to be a how. There can't be a problem without a solution. And we remind ourselves that we gain access and entry into the land where the answers are known. So Anita decided that she wanted to explore this. When Carl Rogers spoke at the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference in 1956, Carl Rogers was a great psychologist and he was the founding father of psychotherapy. He believed in every single person's potential. He was hunched over when he was giving his lecture, this hunchback. I mean, just imagine him hunched over with all of these many years of sitting in a therapy room, leaning over and getting close to the people that he was counseling. And he said, I have found the most majestic, miraculous experience. And he called that experience unconditional positive regard. He said, in that experience of him simply being present for others, but not just being present, fully aware, fully focused on them in the moment, but with the unconditional positive regarding feeling in his heart, that no matter what the story they told him, no matter what horrendous thing perhaps they had participated in, no matter what had happened or what they'd done, in his heart of hearts, he held only positive regard for the other. In this regard, he said, it's kind of a healing agent is produced that is a balm, a transforming experience for people, that when two or more people come together, there's a mystical other than that can be experienced. So we have access to ideas and information that alone, and neither of us are able to find. If we're by ourselves, we can't find it on our own. We need to come together to be able to find the answers. So Anita wanted this, and she availed herself of the opportunity by entering into a Partners in Believing group. Now, where she lived, we're nearby. We were nearby, and we happened to be able to find help for her and then created that. But you can create your own. It can be one other person who supports you and you're willing to support someone else who has goals, someone else who would like to improve their life. So that's really the only criteria, is that you decide to come together in a supportive mind, that you really want to support each other, build your goals, dream your dreams, and find your answers. It can be one person, it can be two people, it can be three people, it can be a group of six. But the idea is that you strategize your life and you construct your life so that there are some people that you can call upon and meet with over coffee, over the phone, or set a date, who you believe in and your highest good. They believe in your potential. You create that by attracting them, looking for them, seeking for them. And actually, the highest way you created, as the best way that you do this, is you become one yourself by practicing believing for other people and seeing in them, and then calling for their highest good. You attract to you people who believe and see for you and call forth your highest good. It is something that for many, many years, successful people have practiced, and you can research this. There's a lot of support for it, but the bottom line is you have to decide to bring it into your life. You have to decide that part of the structure of your life is that on a regular and repeated basis, you're going to cause yourself to move into a higher frequency of thinking by putting in place a mastermind meetings or some partner in believing. It can be a phone call. So I've been on a phone call with another one of my friends for over 5 years now, and it happens at 7 a.m. Pacific time, Friday mornings. The call is with my friend, and she's also a vision creator. She holds a high potential. She's seeking greater things to express through her world, through the world that she sees. And she supports me in remembering and reminding me about what's true about me. And there's times that I get on the phone and I'll get on a phone call and she'll say, I was just thinking about you. And you know what, Tammy? And then she'll just start sharing with me and she'll remind me, just about things that come out of the blue. But every Friday morning at 7 a.m., unless I'm out of the country, I'm up and ready and on the phone because I know the value of what happens in my life, the arc of my life over time by having at least one. And I have many partners in believing. But with your partners in believing, you'll find yourself brought up through short at times, but by your own limiting beliefs, your own limiting thinking. It's as if you heard, it's hard to see the picture when you're the one in the frame. So your partner in believing, they're not in the frame, so they can see, they're not in the condition of your life, so they might not even recognize that you're actually holding a limitation. And you start to tell them your story. And it's very, very helpful to have someone who isn't caught in the condition to be able to give another perspective. But you have to want to be in that higher perspective. You have to go to that meeting knowing that you have one intention, and that is to be in service of your partner. But during your sharing, you allow your partner to be in service of you, and you trust that they only have your highest interest in mind. So Anita would go to her group and they said to her, so what's your vision? And she said, well, my vision is a home for my family. I have 2 children and we live in a 1-bedroom apartment. And my son, he even named it a shoebox. I did the math, but with my income, I only have $500 a month for rent. And there's absolutely no way, I've looked, there's no way I can get a house for $500 a month. So the partner said, well, forget about the money for a moment, for just a minute. What's your vision? Describe the vision. So they helped her get more definite on her vision, to pay attention to what it is that she really would love in that very clear mental picture, a very, very clear mental blueprint of it for herself. So what would you love? When you form the mental picture in your vision, you get crystal clear. You get as crystal clear as you can in your own mind's eye. That's what you want to write down. You want to write it down, because it helps with that kind of clarity. The more that you write, the more clear you become. So when they asked Anita what did she want and to describe it in more detail, and she said, okay, she saw herself in an older home. She loved older homes, and she wanted it to have an arched doorway that they would pass through as they entered into the house. And she saw a white picket fence around the house, and she wanted a fenced backyard. She didn't want a big backyard. She just wanted a small yard so that they could have a dog. She wanted 3 bedrooms. She wanted a window over the kitchen sink, because the apartment where she lived, where she was washing the dishes, whenever she'd look into a blank wall, she found it depressing. So for her, having a window over the kitchen sink was desirable. She wanted a fireplace. So her partners in believing helped her describe the little house that she wanted for her family. And every time she would describe her vision, she would conclude by saying, when she would finish, she'd sigh and she'd say, but I don't have the money. I don't have the money. And they'd say, okay, but if you didn't know that, if you didn't have the money, and then she'd say, okay, but I do know that. And they said, but if you didn't know that, if you didn't know that you didn't have the money, what would you be doing? And she said, well, I do know I have the money. I don't have the money. And they said, but if you didn't believe it was impossible, what would you do? And she said, well, I'd be looking for that house. And they said, okay, then, well, go look for the house. And she thought, well, that's strange, but I'm willing to at least give this process a try. So she started house hunting, and she told a real estate agent that she was looking for this house, the house that she wanted, and she wanted to rent it or lease it, and perhaps even possibly to have the option that would allow her to buy it someday. But of course, the agent said, well, how much money can you pay, and how much do you have to put down as a down payment? And she said, not very much, you know, just help me find what's available. And then we talked about it, and her group had coached her in not positioning herself by what she thought she could pay, but just by to go out there to see what was available, what was possible. And they kept holding for her in that appropriate time, in the appropriate way, that was beyond anything that she could currently understand. Her vision, that that her vision was possible. So they just kept holding that it was possible. That they stood in the vision with her, that it was possible, and they kept affirming for her that this vision was possible. So a week went by, and another week went by, and it would go on and on. And then one day she came to the meeting, and she said that the real estate agent called, and he found the house, and I saw it, and oh my gosh, this house, it has the arched doorway, and it has a picket fence, and it needs to be repainted. I mean, it even had the threshold, and it needs to be resurfaced, and sanded down and painted, but it has the window over the sink, and it has the 3 bedrooms, and it has a little fireplace, and it has a fenced in yard. It was a perfect size yard, and there's no grass, and there's no flowers or anything. She said, but it's there. But the rent was $900 a month. And it's just, I mean, there's no way. And then she started to cry. And she said, I just don't understand this. I mean, I feel worse now than ever. I mean, now I can see what I want, but I just can't have it. So right there, I can't have it. I mean, $400 more, there's no way I can do that. So later, when I spoke to a couple of them in the English group, they said that they almost bought into her belief. Yes, with that income, it's impossible. So if you're a partner in believing, your role is to not get caught up in the story, but it's to be reminding yourself and others of possibilities beyond our awareness. Now, they weren't saying to her, go into debt for the house. They were just saying, we want to stay in the mind of possibility. So they said to her, okay, suppose that you didn't know it was impossible for you to have this house. What would you do? She goes, I don't know. She said, I'm convinced by the condition that it's impossible. They said, no, stay in the question. If I didn't know it was impossible, if I really thought there was a chance, what could I do? So she kept saying, she kept staying in that question. And remember, the quality of life is framed by the quality of the question that we're willing to ask. So most of us learn to ask puny questions of the universe. So she's learning to ask a bigger question here. Okay, so if I didn't believe it was impossible, what would I do? And her mind kept telling her, it's impossible. Okay, but if I didn't believe it was impossible, what would I do? And she stayed in that question. Now remember this, the universe first currency is ideas, not money, ideas. You can get a $5 million idea, you can get a $10,000 idea, you can get a $900 idea. And that's all she needed, was one $900 idea. I mean, here's the truth. We live in an abundant universe that's infinite in scope. It has plenty of $900 ideas. But if we're thinking, I can't have it, I don't have what it takes, there's no way I can buy something or have something or rent something that's going to cost $900 a month. No $900 idea can penetrate the limited mind. So perhaps right now, in reference to your own vision, you've constructed a framework that actually becomes a barrier to the idea that will break those limits, those things that are actually constricting you, so that things can break loose for you. Urged by her partners in believing, Anita said, okay, if I didn't believe it was impossible, what can I do? She's thinking this, and that's what she kept thinking, so all of a sudden an idea comes to her, I have an idea. Suppose I think the house was impossible, that it wasn't impossible. If I thought I could have the house, why wouldn't I write a letter to the owner and tell him my vision and tell him what I would do if I had that house for a year? and then talk about the flowers that I would plant and how I would refinish the floors in the kitchen and how I would redo the cupboards in the kitchen. And so she wrote a letter and she told him about herself and her children and her circumstances, and that she could pay $500 a month, but what she would do for the house if she and her children could live there for 1 year. And she described the kitchen with the counters polished and the floors redone and the cupboards refinished. And she described the living room with those floors refinished. And she described the house crystal clean and clear. And she described the backyard with planted flowers, and that she would grow there, and the picket fence all repainted, and the flowers growing along the walkway from the front door to the picket fence. And then she drew a picture of the house as she was imagining it, and she put that in the letter. And she took the letter to the mailbox and she said, "This or something better still," you know, and she let it go. So she went back and she told her group, she said, "I talked about everything. I described everything. I drew everything. I listed 40 things that I could do if he would let me have the house for $500. And all he has to do is provide the supplies and I'll do the work. I'll do all the work." And so she said, I sent the letter off, and they prayed. They all prayed with her. And know that her vision would come true exactly as she envisioned it, or that she would be guided to something better. If you remember, we're not grasping the vision. We're holding with an open hand, so that this or something better still. We don't want to get so attached that we actually eliminate other possibilities, other things that actually may be of a higher order. So she waited for a response from the owner. And Anita waited a week, and then she went back to the group, and she says, "I haven't heard anything back from him. So I guess he's probably already rented it." And they waited another week. And then she went back the next week, and they could hardly contain her. She was absolutely beaming. And when she walked through the door, she says, "Oh my gosh, that landlord called me last night, and he said he'd had my letter on his desk for over a week, along with 2 other applicants willing to pay the complete $900 a month and a deposit." And he called me up, and he was kind of gruff, and he said, "I don't know why I'm doing this, but there's something in your letter that just won't leave me alone." He says, "So here's what I'm going to do. Here's the deal. I'm going to have you sign a contract for the work completed every quarter. You've got to figure out how you're going to do the work over the year, but you're going to put into quarters, that quarter by quarter, that certain things are going to get done, and in a certain amount will get done. And I will provide you the equity for the work but you provide the sweat. And if you do what you said you're going to do, I'll help you out. And you can have this house for a year for $500 a month." And she was just beaming. And she says, "And we're moving in 30 days. So 30 days later, Anita and her moves into her vision. But the story doesn't end there. See, what happened for Anita is, over the next year, that she experienced herself as a much bigger person, much more capable, much more creative. And that's what happens with vision creating. Within the next year, she'd left her job. She started a business from home. She spent more time with her kids. And while her income dipped a bit at first, then it began to skyrocket. And a year later, Anita actually took out a lease option on her house. And within 3 years, she bought that home. And there are some that would say that there's no way she could get from where she was, a $500 a month with no education, working in a fast food restaurant, to being where she was 3 years later. But here's the truth. She put herself on a different wavelength. She put herself in a different frequency. And on that frequency, she was way more abundant, way more creative, and there was more time and way more fun. Now, if she'd stayed stuck in the idea that there was no way she could do it, then that would have been exactly what she would have done. That's what would have happened for her. Now, but not there wasn't a way that it could happen, but it couldn't have happened for her because she would have been stuck in that, and she wasn't in harmony with the idea. It can happen for me. And that's why we want to have partners in believing. That's why we want to have other people who help remind us that when we're having difficulty remembering for ourselves. So remember, when you're picking your partners in believing, you want to pick people that you admire, whose judgment you value, who you know to be generous. And then, of course, you want to bring those same qualities to the time with them. So I want to tell you a story about a man named Ed. At this point in the story, he's on the verge of bankruptcy. He's figured out, he's figured he's made way too many mistakes and things are not going to work out for him. He's a former alcoholic and he had found his way into recovery. He found a relationship with his higher power that helped him stay sober. He found a partner in believing and he found another way. To think of a partner in believing, he found that a partner in believing is someone who believes in you beyond your current state. And of course, that is what a partner in believing is. So this partner in believing told him how to deal with relationships, with money, with health problems. It depends on how we maintain our spiritual condition. So our spiritual condition gives rise to the ability to handle any problem. It's our relationship with our higher power. I mean, basically, Ed told me about when he told me that he said, he'd been challenged because he'd always allowed circumstances to dictate his experience. So his partner in believing says to him, so what's your most pressing problem that's causing you the most stress in your life? And if someone asked you that question right now, what's your most pressing problem? What might be causing you the most stress in your life? What would you say? Well, Ed said, the bank. A couple of years ago, I borrowed a great deal of money and now the bank wants to be repaid. Yeah, funny how the banks work like that, right? Well, anyway, so Ed went on and he said, business is slow and I don't have any money. I went to the loan officer at the bank and I tried to work something out. I told him what I was doing with my life and that I was really now honestly in recovery, but I needed time. And my candor impressed the banker, but he said his hands were tied. The bank has to be repaid. So I asked to talk to the supervisor and I told the supervisor what I told the loan officer. I offered to pay the bank $500 a month. And he said that he could, the agent said that he could not accept payments of that amount in view of the large sum that he had owed. And he said that if he didn't clear up the matter, that he would have to sue me. So 3 weeks ago, I got a notice from the bank. Ed was saying that they had filed suit against him to collect the amount of money that was owed plus attorney fees. And he'd taken out a loan for $20,000. He didn't use the money to expand the business, but he drank the money away with interest. And now he owed the bank $30,000. And he says, I guess I don't have any choice now except to declare bankruptcy. So he told his friend, as he was talking to his partner in believing, his partner said, is this what you really want to do? And he said, well, no, of course not. And the friend said, well, then when you went to the bank, did you think that you really that they would really take the offer? And he said, well, I'd hope they would. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't think they would take anything less. So you didn't offer what you really could afford? And Ed said, well, no, I offered him twice what I thought I could actually afford. And even that wasn't enough. And the friend said, well, there's two things wrong there with this, what you're doing. First, you offered something that you knew was not in your best interest. You offered the bank $500 a month, knowing that you really couldn't pay $500 a month right then. And knowing that you could only pay $250 a month. So Ed, you're being dishonest, and dishonesty is never rewarded. Secondly, not in the long run. Sometimes it looks as if in the short run, but it's never rewarded in the long run. Just like the fruit, if you're going to get, if you plant a seed, you're going to get the plant. If you plant dishonesty, you're going to reap a reward of that. And that's what he was learning here. Secondly, he said, and most importantly, what you did not expect his offer to be accepted. Therefore, it wasn't. So, and he says, what do you mean? He demanded. And he said, I can't control what the bank decides. I did everything I could. I even prayed. So his friend said, I'm confused. His friend answered patiently. He says, first of all, you tell me you didn't expect the bank to offer to take your offer. And then you tell me you prayed. And then you tell me you have no ability to affect the bank's decisions. He said, what do you think prayer is? And Ed said, well, I've been praying for God's will for me. So his friend said, do you think God's will for you and your kids will be to be thrown out on the street while the bank takes your house? Do you think that's Do you think that by saying a prayer will change the outcome of what God's will is for you? And Ed said, I hadn't thought about it for like that for that moment. I guess I don't really know what prayer is, he said, and I don't really know what it does. So his friend leaned over and he said to him, the answer to every problem already exists. When you ask yourself, what is the most pressing problem you're facing? What is it that's causing you the most stress? Know this, the answer to the problem already exists. This isn't the first time in history of the universe that such a question could be asked or a problem that existed. The answer is here. It does exist. This is an abundant universe and it's infinitely intelligent. The challenges of the opportunity for you is to tune into the stream of awareness of where their answer dwells. So Ed's friend said to him, you don't understand that you're part of it. You don't understand that you're part of life itself. We all are. This life exists in you and in me. It's in everyone. And what prayer does, or good thinking, or meditation, or whatever you want to call it, is eliminated in your mind, the separation that exists between you and the answer. There's no real separation between you and the infinite, but we experience that separation because we've created it in our minds. So prayer or meditation of good thinking, it's like a direct line. It eliminates that sense of separation that we feel between ourselves and opportunity, ideas and resources, and abundance itself. So it drowns out the noise and it decreases that fear, and it opens us up to reminding and actually the feeling. I felt like it's a companionship for many, many years. It's this companionship. It's just like knowing I'm not alone, that there's even though I operate at times in my own sense of awareness as an individual over time, it's grown and grown and grown in my capacity to sense that I'm part of this incredible life itself. And I will say to you that you can have an experience of an increasing day by day feeling of this, just a natural feeling inside of you that just generally reminds you again and again, I just love my life, how grateful you can be, how wonderful it is to have this life of this experience and this opportunity to co-create. And this was completely new territory for Ed. And he said, I don't see how this helps. He said, it's like his friend said, if the answer already exists, and then the universe knows the answer. And he says, well, yeah. And then the universe will tell you if you listen. And once you hear the answer, then it's up to you to follow through. The purpose of prayer or meditation or good thinking is to bring you into alignment with that part of you that can have access to the answer. And you do that when you get quiet. And that's when you affect the outcome. You get in tune with the answer, you get quiet, you listen for the inspiration. But then you have to do the footwork. You have to do what you're told. Just like Anita got an idea. She said, there's no way that I can have this house. There's no way. And she got past that thinking. I can't have a question for which there isn't an answer. So she got quiet. And the idea to write the letter came. So this is why we have Partners in Believing, to remind you at times that when you get stuck in the problem will seem big because you're the one having it. So you want people who weren't impressed by the problem. They're not impressed by the infinite intelligence. They've impressed by the infinite intelligence in the universe. They're impressed by your capacity to have access to that. So the answers don't always come in immediately. You don't just flip on a switch and it's all shifted, but there's always a beginning of a shift. And if you pay attention, so what will happen is ask, wait, and see. Ask of the highest good and expect something to happen. It's like, so Ed began to daily ask for the highest will for the bank and for himself. Meanwhile, the lawsuit was looming. So he hired a bankruptcy attorney and he prepared for a court appearance. But in the midst of impending disaster, he was holding in his mind, and Ed kept praying and he kept holding. He said, I really do want the best for the bank. And I want what's best for me and my family. I would really love the opportunity to repay that money and to do it in a way that's in harmony with what I really can pay. And he said all of a sudden he began a sense that a peace was growing inside of him. Not a peace, it was a peace based on the circumstances, because the circumstances hadn't changed, but inwardly he was starting to feel differently. So even the presence of what looked like a disaster to him was starting to feel like a growing peace. So one morning while he was sitting in the office, he heard a voice, go to a meeting, and the 12 steps meeting. And part of his weekly practice was, so there was a meeting close by that he usually attended. But as he was preparing to leave, the voice said, no, not that meeting, go to another meeting. So instead, back to that, the voice, he found a meeting at a different part of town. And while there, he noticed a man sitting that was staring at him, very uncomfortable. And he bolted for the door as soon as the last speaker sat down. But the fellow who had been staring blocked his way and said, listen, I think I know you. Didn't we go to school together? Nervously, he quoted, it was just like, he goes, I don't think so. After all, he hadn't grown up in the city that he was in at the moment, and surely somebody couldn't know him. As it turned out, he did know that the two men did actually know each other. They indeed attended the same elementary school more than 20 years earlier in a small town about 200 miles south of there. And the man was so delighted to see Ed. In the course of talking about their work, the man mentioned his father, whom Ed had known growing up, and he mentioned the bank where his father worked. Specifically, he was the senior officer in charge of the diversified assets, in other words, the bad loans. And the blood just flushed in Ed's face, and he said, oh my gosh. And he just he was reading, what he'd heard. He was re-listening in his mind to what he heard, not only the name of the bank that was suing him, but it was the very division within the bank where he owed the debt. So Ed was he just didn't want to share his secret. So he said, well, say hi to your dad. And he walked away, but he was dumbfounded that there were implications. And he wondered about this encounter. What a miserable coincidence, he thought. You finally, a man, I can't get away from my problems anywhere, he was thinking. And what he didn't realize was that within these circumstances, things seemed to collide. It was in unexpected ways. The universe really was at work. And and then he noticed as he began, so anyway, the universe was really at work. And the next day the phone rang in Ed's office, and it was his old schoolmate's father, the banker in charge of the diversified assets. So his son, he told him that his son had dropped by last night and was talking about that he had mentioned running into you. And, at first I didn't remember you, the banker said, but he said, as they began to talk, he goes, I did recall your family. And then today, as I was going through my files, I noticed the bank's action against you. And I also noticed the notes that you'd been in to talk to the loan officer, and that you mentioned that you were trying to do what you were trying to do with your life. And I know the problem you're involved in, and I know what it's done for my son, because you have to remember they were at the same meeting, so they were in a similar situation. So he said, listen, I want to talk to you about this. I know you probably expect me to tell you to bring an attorney, but I want you to come by yourself, and I want you to do it this afternoon. I want you to come in this afternoon. I want you to come at 4:00. So it was a very long afternoon for him. If he did, he couldn't afford to pay the money either. So maybe this was a big shot. It was a big, long shot. And an old friend of his son simply wanting to say hi. Yes, they were suing you for forcing bankruptcy, but hey, it's nothing personal. This is what Ed's thinking. So when Ed stepped into the mahogany paneled office that afternoon, the banker came around in his massive curved desk, and he shook his hand and offered him a cup of coffee. And Ed was surprised. He hadn't expected to be treated like a real human being. The man went right to the heart of the matter. He says, I'm willing to figure out a way with you, what we might do, a way that we might be able to work with you with your situation. And I want to know what kind of payments you really can make. What is it that you need? And the banker asked. And what he needed what he wanted, there's what he needed and what he wanted, there's a difference. Or what Ed wanted was for this whole mess to disappear. And what Ed wanted was a quick fix. But this kind of plan would not offer in this space for the growth. And so the reality of it was this, he was offering him an opportunity. So Ed said that he recognized that perhaps he was given some surprise support from all the work that he'd been doing by trying to get this mind in harmony with the outcome that he wanted. So he said, well, the truth is what I really can pay is $250 a month. And I can't do that. And the banker thought for a moment and he said, well, that won't even pay the interest on this loan monthly. And there was another moment of silence before he began to speak. And the banker said, well, in view of the loan and where it's at right now, he said, I'm gonna rewrite the interest on this. And he was able to adjust the interest rate below the prime because the bank had already written off the loan as a loss. And he said, we will accept the $250 a month for now. And I'm going to rely on you to tell me when you can afford to pay more. And so now that made him this new arrangement. The bank could recoup its money, and Ed was going to be able to continue working to clear away the debt without filing for bankruptcy. Within 4 years, that he'd paid off the debt entirely. And Ed said, not only was this great that he got to repay the debt, but this was a greater experience and awareness that he gained in the process. There's always a way, no matter what you're facing, no matter what difficulty, no matter what the challenge, there's always a way, but not at the frequency of the problem. We've got to get ourselves into a different thinking. We've got to put ourselves in that higher frequency. When we get ourselves into a different frequency, most of us need to help. We need help to help us do that. So that's why we create a partner in believing, somebody that you can count on to remind you that the truth, when you forget and get caught up in the facts, that somebody who will remind you that even in the presence of the overwhelming evidence that the problem is bigger than your opportunity, you want somebody who stands there and says, I believe in who you really are. I know your heart. I know there cannot be definitionally that there cannot be a problem without an answer. So practice now considering one person that you know, even one person you know, that you might want to invite to simply play the role for you, a partner, a believing that you are a no limit person. That sometimes we don't even know that we're trapped into this limited thinking because we've come so much to believe that the limitation is true and that we act according to those beliefs, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So your partners in believing are going to bring you a fresh perspective, that they can see where you've closed yourself off, and they're going to help lift each other up to this higher perspective. The answer to every problem already exists. It always exists. There's an answer waiting. So now it's up to you to decide whether you're willing to put in place the structure to create it and believe in my belief to make it happen.